Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. Today we're quilting block number 5, our scrap overload block with undulation. I'm going to cover that block with one single design and add a gorgeous flowing texture over the surface. So let's get started long arm quilting this design together. So I'm going to begin stitching just from the edge of the quilt with just a random wiggly line. And I can push this, I can go as far into the block as I can, maybe even hit the bottom rail. And that will add a really nice diagonal texture. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to run this line nice and wiggly to where, yep, right there. That's where I felt the rail kind of run up against, the ruler base run up against the edge of the rail. And that looks like that's a little bit low. This is something to always check and make sure that something's not in your way. And then you can always double check yourself once you get off into the batting area. Something might have been, I might have left something on the table or something like that. And that accidentally bumped up against the frame. Yeah, I should have been able to stitch down an additional 2 inches. So it's always good before you get started quilting every time to check in on your machine and make sure that you haven't accidentally set a quilt or a project or something underneath the frame. That will cause you some problems. Okay, so I'm going to stitch back on here and I'm going to take a line and go in and start my undulation effect. And that effect is really fun to create. Basically, you're going to stitch in and get close, and then at other times you're going to pull away and get farther and farther away. So here I'm coming in close. Now I'm going to pull out and go really, leave a nice wide gap there. That looks great. Now I'm going to come in close for just a little while and then finish off with a nice wide gap. And we use this design on our Tree of Life block, and it is one of my favorite designs. So if I seem to be overusing it, that's why. I just absolutely love it. I think it's awesome. Okay, so I pretty much use the limit of my frame. I really can't quilt beyond that line. So now I'm going to go inside and fill in this inside area. And the reason why I chose this filler design is because really not much is going to show up on this block. And I just wanted to add a nice flowing texture here. I wanted to add more movement over all of these blocky and boxy shapes. And this is also really fast. And I feel like whenever we have a block that just took a long time to quilt, we might as well, a long time to piece, we might as well save a little bit of time in the quilting. So here we go. You see how I'm bringing those lines closer, but then I'm stretching out and adding extra distance in between these lines. Here I'm going to go way out. And I want to keep in mind that I don't want to, stitch this too dense. I don't want this block to be ridiculously more quilted than the other blocks I've stitched so far. So when I have a question, if I'm worried that that's starting to get just a little bit too dense and intense, or maybe right there, just a little bit too much quilting, then I'm going to intentionally add some wider gaps in here. And the nice thing about undulation is the more irregular the design is, the better it's going to look. So you can have whole sets of lines that come in and all they are is just massive gap lines, and that's okay. The wonderful thing about it is there really aren't any rules, and it's okay to just go in there, leave lots of white space. Look how fast I quilted that. Just inches and inches of space now filled in with 2 lines of quilting, and it looks absolutely amazing. Now I'm getting a lot of bounds here, and you might be wondering why. I know my back rail is set up a bit high. I was working on another thicker quilt, and I took that off and forgot to move my back rail down. And this is another thing, another reminder, check in on your frame before you get started quilting every time. Especially if you've taken a couple of days off or you've just finished one project and you were moving to this project, it's always good to just check in on what's going on. You never know what you can just, frames are tables, they can get junky, and it definitely can be a place where you end up piling up lots of stuff in other projects. So just watch out for that. So I'm going to quickly advance the quilt on the frame, and it looks like I actually decided to do that in the exact wrong place. And the reason is, if I continue to advance, well, my foot's just going to hit the back rail and I'm only going to be able to move it by an inch or so. I really need to stitch out of here because I'm done with that whole area. And I'm just stitching right along the edge of the quilt and then coming down the side. And that's just stabilizing that block. It's going to make it so much easier when we finish it. We're ready to do our stitching around our victory lap. So I'm going to bring it all the way down to the very edge of what I can quilt. And now I will advance the quilt through the frame. And as far as how much I want to advance it, I want to look at my quilting design. I don't want to advance it too far beyond my quilting design. That looks good. Probably end up having to advance it 3 times for this block. There we go. Tighten that up. Smooth it out. Yeah, these supersized blocks have definitely been perfect for quilting on the Longarm because, you know, they provide a nice amount of space to quilt. And certainly, you know, at least on my frame, I have to advance it at least a few times every time I stitch one of the blocks. So that's great experience too. All right, so that's the limit of my frame. I'm gonna make a little mark right there just so I keep that in my mind. And I just stitch back and forth right there in the batting area. And that visually provides me just as much, you know, notice basically of that's the limit that I need. Okay, now I'm going to come inside. Again, get back to my pattern. Get close, widen out, get close, widen out. It's kind of like a dance. And then, yeah, go in there and occasionally leave really big, irregular patches of openness. Now, I've got a lot of seam allowances here, and you might have noticed I'm trying to avoid them. I don't want to hit those seam allowances, particularly where all of them came together in one spot. I don't want to hit that dead on if I can avoid it. Unfortunately, I'm feeling some of my seam allowances aren't feeling particularly flat. So I'm going to slip my fingers under there and just try and smooth and flatten that out as much as possible. You know, it's really important to give your blocks a good solid press with a pressing cloth. And I think I might have missed the pressing cloth step with this block. They feel flat, they're definitely open, but they just don't feel like they're wanting to stay flat while the quilt is on the frame. So there we go. You know, once you get a few stitches in it, then it all starts laying down a little bit better. Bring that line in nice and close. Now I'll create a nice big gap here. And always feel like you can change up the design. Like I think I'll curl that out this way a little bit. And then curl that in. I think that looks cool. And you could go inside these pockets. If you really wanted to stitch it up a notch, you could go inside these pockets and quilt circles. That would be pebbling. You could stitch some paisleys. You could go inside and stitch stippling. I call that Goldilocks when you do that. So lots of different possibilities. If you don't feel like this is enough quilting or enough texture for your block, I just hesitate to throw a whole lot of thread and a really complicated design at a block like this, because the design is largely going to get lost because of how scrappy the block is, because of how many fabrics and how busy those fabrics are. So for me personally, I think an all-over design like this is a-okay. In fact, actually, I think this is a great choice because it's simple and it's so fast to finish. So I think I can maybe squeeze in one line if I'm really careful down here. So let's see if I can do this. I don't want to hit the back rail and accidentally have straight lines in my block. So I'm going to be really careful. I'm going to push it to the limit, but not take it beyond that limit. That looks really good. It's almost a straight line, but not quite. So I'm going to be really careful about that. And again, I'm going to stitch all the way up to the limit of my frame. And then I'll advance the quilt one more time. Well, I actually think I'm going to have to do that 2 more times because that is the limit of my frame. You can see I'm still missing 4 inches there. And it's just a good habit to get into, to just know how much space you've got to quilt in at any given time. And I can only quilt to right there. With this, you know, once I've advanced the quilt, this is as much as I have space to stitch. So now I'll come in, and I want to make that this is almost a straight line and I don't like that, so I'm gonna really try and make this more interesting. I'm gonna swing out with a nice big curve there. Bring that in, make it more interesting. Swing out again. This is the thing I love about undulation. As soon as it starts to feel boring, then you have absolute permission to go in and shake it up and make it much, much more interesting. Let's do that again. This time I'm going to bring it real close here. That looks great. And then now I'm going to really exaggerate through the middle. Bring that out. I'm just making it up as I go along. If this is a struggle for you, and especially if you're quilting a design like this with walking foot quilting, you know, these curves can be tricky. It can be tricky to quilt that smoothly if you're on a home machine because, of course, you don't have this perspective that you can get. Like I can see the whole block here in front of me on the long arm. So my best advice in situations like that would be to figure out some method of marking the design on the quilt. And of course that poses challenges in and of itself because it's so busy, hardly any marks are going to consistently show up. So I'd use masking tape, like a 1/4 inch masking tape would be a good suggestion. You know, you could also, I think a Hera marker is what it's called, where you can kind of, it's a marker that doesn't leave a mark, it leaves a crease line. So that's an idea too. You know, you just have to figure out what's going to work and give you the look that you want. And keep in mind that the irregularity is kind of the key with this. Not having it come out absolutely perfect, matchy-matchy, giving yourself permission to really shake it up, leave nice wide gaps between those lines whenever you can fit them in. And then try not to nail those seam allowances too perfectly. As you can see right there, it caused me to wobble just a little bit. That's okay. I'm just being really careful to keep an eye on the limit of my frame so I don't stitch beyond the space that I've got to work in. I think I have room for one more line here. Let's come in. And I'm going to turn that wobble. I think I wobbled right there a little bit. I'm going to turn that wobble into an extra feature. We'll turn that into a closer line right there and then widen it out right here. I think that looks nice. Bring that in. Stretch it out. Awesome. Okay, so I think just one more shift through the frame, a little bit more stitching, and this is what it looked like when I finished my scrap overload block. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot quilting undulation over this scrap overload block with me. If you'd like to get started and piece and quilt this gorgeous scrappy block, you can find the quilt pattern at leahday.com/friendship. I'm also a dealer for Grace Company for their machines and wonderful quilting frames. And this system that I am using is the Grace Unique 15R or 14 Plus, same machine, just different numbers, and the Continuum quilting frame. And I absolutely love this setup. It's really made quilting so much faster and so much easier for me. You can come and learn more about it at leahday.com/grace. And if you use the coupon code Hello My Quilting Friends, you can save $100 on your Grace Unique frame or machine purchase. So come and check it out at leahday.com/grace. And until next time, let's go quilt.